To get to Tibet, we took the long flight across the Pacific to Quanzhou in China, and then on up to Chengdu. We flew with China Southern Airlines in their 787 Dreamliner. Russian cities now are mostly dominated by high-rise buildings, and we always find though that these areas where the coffee shops and the young folks gather are always more interesting. There's always a lot of life, and there's always lots of people moving around, locals and tourists. The coffee shops are always attractive, and it's a great place to go to eat. Being China, there's always lots of food available, and there's always very, very tasty snacks you can pick up on the street or in the coffee shops. It's a very enjoyable way to spend some time. A great attraction in Chengdu and brilliant place to visit is the giant panda breeding station. The giant pandas as a species were close to extinction, but now due to a breeding program they've been brought back, and there's now quite a few of them in captivity and also in the wild. The pandas are voracious eaters, and they spend 12 out of 24 hours eating, but they live mainly on bamboo shoots, which are not very nutritious, and for that reason nursing mothers can produce nutritious milk for their offspring. When not eating or sleeping, the young pandas like to practice their climbing skills. This will be very amusing because they're not exactly the most elegant climbers, but it's great fun to watch. When two of the young pandas get involved together, it can be even more amusing to watch because they seem as though they want to outdo each other. Besides the black and white pandas, there are also red pandas, and these are really cute looking animals. At first they weren't considered pandas, but now apparently they have decided that they are in fact pandas. Not far from Chengdu is the Lashan giant Buddha statue. This is a 233-foot tall stone statue which was built during the Tang dynasty. It is carved out of the cliff face and faces Mount Himeng, with the rivers flowing beneath its feet. It is the largest stone statue in the world, and by far the tallest pre-modern statue. Construction started in 713, led by a Chinese monk named Hai Tong. He hoped that it would calm the turbulent waters which plagued vessels traveling down the river. Then it was time to fly from Chengdu to Lhasa in Tibet. Now this route takes one along the north side of the Himalaya mountains, and so the view from the left-hand side of the aircraft is quite impressive. The higher peaks are further south. One can just see them on the horizon. The Tibetan Plateau was formed when the subcontinent of India crashed into Asia raising the level of the earth to the north. Tibet is now completely controlled by China and is an autonomous region. The city of Lhasa is 3,500 meters above sea level, 12,100 feet. So it's very noticeable when one arrives. The air is very thin. The Tibetan architecture is quite unique. Lots of 3- and 4-story buildings with attractive windows. It gets very cold here in the winter, so one assumes that they use the windows shades to keep the places warm. On the top of all the buildings there are prayer flags, and they're always put on the high point because there they can catch the wind and the message can be transmitted more easily. Barkhor Street is the oldest street in Lhasa. It is part of this sacred way around the Jokin temple, and Tibetans walk clockwise around the temple and pray to pay their respects. Most merely walk, but some also prostrate themselves as they go. Along the way there's a lively market scene with selling all sorts of wares, and Buddhists like flowers because they take them to the temples. The Patola Palace is one of the great iconic buildings of the world and is named after Mount Patola, an important mountain in Buddhist tradition. It was the chief residence of the Dalai Lamas until the 14th Dalai Lama fled to India after the Chinese invasion in 1959. Before the Chinese invasion, the square in front of the Patola Palace was a very lively place with buildings and entertainment and that sort of thing, but when the Chinese arrived they cleared it, and now they have troops marching around and the Chinese flag on display.
Yeah.
At the other end of the square is a monument built by the Chinese to the People's Liberation of Tibet. The Patola Palace stands 13 stories high and contains over 1,000 rooms, 10,000 shrines and 200,000 statues. It is built at an altitude of 3,700 meters or 12,100 feet above sea level. Each day tourists and pilgrims make the arduous climb up the steep stairs to get to the palace, which is now more of a museum because the Dalai Lama no longer resides there. It's a fascinating place, but it's quite an arduous climb, the 900 feet up to the entrance to the palace. Along the way you see pilgrims who come into the city from the countryside. The upper part of the building is the religious part, and this is where the Dalai Lama used to sit behind these yellow curtains and watch what's going on below down in the square. 2 horsehair drums were used to announce the start of the curfew. The Jongkan Temple is the spiritual center of Tibet and the holiest destination for all Buddhist pilgrims. It is in the center of Lhasa and was originally built in 1647 AD. It was built by craftsmen from China, Tibet and Nepal, so features an intriguing mix of architectural styles. The Jokin Temple is in the center of the complex and is a very ornate building. It is surmounted by the drama wheel, which is one of the oldest symbols in Buddhism. Inside is the Dalai Lama's throne. While down below they're lighting buttered candles for the altars. All day long pilgrims counterambulate around the Jokin Temple. It's done in a clockwise direction, and it is a continuous procession all the way through the day. The streets are very lively with tourists, pilgrims and just people going about their business. There's never a quiet moment in the streets. It's very interesting to see the different forms of dress. because a lot of these people come in from the country and they're quite rural. It's fascinating to watch the different forms of dress, the old and the new. I like the lady on the right in her red hat. We were having lunch in a restaurant overlooking the street, and it gave us a great opportunity to look down on all the action. You'll notice on the middle of the picture there's the incense burner. On all corners there are incense burners, and with the smell of the yak butter and the incense burners, there's quite an aroma to the place. You'll notice that there are a lot of dogs running around, and this is common in Tibet and also in Nepal, because Buddhists revere all life, and so dogs are never put down, and they're all very well looked after, but they're not necessarily owned by any specific person. As you make your way around the circuit, you come across people prostrating themselves towards the temple. When they're doing this, people come up and offer them money, because by giving the people who are doing the prostrating money, the people who give are also getting merit. This fellow would prostrate himself and then do 2 paces to the left and do it again, and he does this all the way around the temple. All the way around the walls of the temple, people are prostrating themselves, very devout and diligent people. Outside the temple, these ladies sit close together with their prayer wheels. Spinning their prayer wheels is meant to send the prayer inside to heaven. Yep. Further on, there are masses of pilgrims who have come, and they're sitting outside the temple, spinning their prayer wheels and chatting amongst themselves. It's an amazing sight.
Hello.
While out in the street, a quilting group were hard at work. They were very much admired by all the people who were passing by, and especially the tourists who thought this was a great sight to see. Along the outside walls are these paintings of typical Chinese traditional lifestyle, which Moira liked, so she took these pictures. Sometimes it's just nice to sit and relax, especially when these 2 ladies came up and sat beside me in traditional dress. The Sera Monastery in Old Lhasa is one of the great think tanks where lively debates on Buddhist doctrines are held each day. Physical gestures are used, each of which has a meaning. The debate unfolds in the presence of teachers with well-set rules and procedures for the debater and the questioner. fellow saying. This is such an interesting thing to watch. I will just stay here for a few moments and watch it as it unfolds. The procedure is very lively and entertaining to watch. One can see how the questioner stands up and questions people who are sitting down, and they have to defend the question, and then they make gestures like this fellow here, and this is all very symbolic. This person here seems to be taking a rather hard beating on his question.
Painting and going, it's like, dude, you painted with
On leaving Lhasa, we took the Friendship Highway down to Kathmandu. All tourists had to have an alien's travel pass to travel in Tibet. The countryside is very impressive, and driving along at the top of the Kemba Pass at 4,794 meters, 15,724 feet, is the view of this Yamdok Tor, the turquoise lake, which is extremely cold because of the altitude. As on every pass or high point, there is abundance of prayer flags catching the wind. The Friendship Highway parallels the Himalayas on the north side. The Himalayas were on our left, and these are the foothills.
come up there, yeah.
So the higher ones, they kind of decide themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
You're being manifest to do my job and
Yeah.
all that. It's better for me to have.
Yes, yes. And I know one of the Dalai Lama from the south part of Tibet. Tap off all his clothes and then sit in front of the tiger like this. That's the tiger. Just like
Further down the road we came to Shikatsi, and this is our hotel for the night. The Tash Il Humpo Monastery is in Shigaski and was founded in 1477 by the first Dalai Lama, and was the seat of the Panchen Lama, who came into existence in the 17th century when the fifth Dalai Lama honored his tutor, the abbot of Tash Il Humpo, with a Panchen title meaning great scholar. Today it is one of the most active monasteries in Tibet, with about 600 monks in 3 colleges.
5,248 meters with the windy place and also very good, like a scenic around it, and also with a lot of prayer flags.
Along the Friendship Highway there's a strict speed limit with checkpoints in and out. We were running a bit too fast, so we stopped and went into this family's house. This was such an interesting experience because this lady, and this is her grandmother with Moira, this lady and then her husband were so proud of their house. It was magnificent. They made us so welcome, and offered us yak tea and yak butter tea. And we had quite a nice chat, and we enjoyed the visit with them. It was very pleasant. For heating, they use yak dung, which they paste on the wall to dry, and then put it out in the air, and apparently it makes a very warm fire. Outside, these young kids who are playing were quite intrigued by these strange people who dropped by to see their parents. Soon we were on our way again, down along the Friendship Highway, with the Himalaya mountains more on our left-hand side over the horizon. We were climbing up to a very high mountain pass, and when we got close, we were greeted by all these prayer flags. This pass is 4,530 meters above sea level, and it was very windy. But as you see, Moira is well wrapped up against the cold, and we enjoyed looking out at the vast terrain. In fact, we went up to the top of the point because we wanted to see a better view of all the flags. The Tibetans like to put the flags at the highest point in the. Continuing on, we went through this narrow valley carved out by this river, and then we climbed up to the next pass, which was at 5,248 meters above sea level. It was still quite windy and quite cold, but it was very enjoyable to see again the flags at the highest point. Our next destination was the Everest base camp, so we had to leave the main road and make a detour up towards the mountain. This is quite fertile ground, and this is the area of yaks. Yaks can only survive at high altitude because of their coat. They get too hot if they're lower down. So this was an ideal place for yaks. They're used for beasts of burden and for meat and their hair. The road got quite rugged, and eventually we got the view we wanted to see of Mount Everest. The high altitude winds cause a plume of snow to blow off the peak of Mount Everest. Close to Everest is the Rangpo Monastery, which can lay claim to be the highest monastery in Tibet and thus in the world. It offers a good view of Mount Everest behind the peak and is still occupied by nuns and monks. Unfortunately, the sign for the base camp at 5,200 meters doesn't mention Mount Everest. Just beyond the base camp for the climbers is set out. There are two, one either side, and they use four-wheel drives to get their equipment up, and they set out on the climb from here. As at every high point in Tibet, there are lots of prayer flags blowing in the wind, and it's very windy up at this altitude, so they blow very well. There are lots of yaks up at the base camp area because they are used for beasts of burden, and when not in use, they're allowed to graze freely. They can live at this altitude very easily. We were able to find a tea shop in a tent up close to the base camp, and this is our group gathered round having our tea. Then we were on our way again, going south and west till eventually we would find a pass that would take us through into Nepal. As we continued on, we got closer to the mountains on our left-hand side, on the south, and we knew that eventually we would come to a pass that would take us through the mountain range and down into Nepal. In the meantime, the view of the mountains as we drove along was very impressive. We crossed over another mountain pass with its prayer flags and stupa. Getting closer to the border, we came to this very windy town that where we were going to stop for lunch. Eventually we came to this deep valley running through the mountains down towards the border with Nepal. On our last night in Tibet, we spent in this hotel, which was in this very little town that was actually built in the valley. So the valley walls were very steep, so the town went up either side, and the roads were very narrow because the valley was so narrow. This was a view from our hotel window, looking down into the narrow street. It was fascinating to drive through the town because the road is very narrow and there was lots of construction going on, but all the construction materials had to be held on the sides of the roads. Here a load of stones had been dropped off, but they were in our way, we couldn't get through. Now these men had to move them out of the way, but they were actually throwing them over and they were rolling down the hill down towards the river below. So it was quite an arduous task, but eventually we did get through. There's a huge amount of traffic goes through from China down through Tibet down to India, and here we were passing trucks that were lined up waiting to get through the border. Now apparently sometimes these trucks have to wait for up to 4 days. It's a very slow and arduous trip, and so the drivers just stay in their vehicles until the valley walls are quite sheer on the inside with nice waterfalls coming down from peaks, and the river has just carved its way through the mountains from the north in Tibet down through into Nepal. It's a very scenic road, and amazing that they were able to build it because it's such a narrow valley. At some points along the valley, honeybees have made their hives high up on the walls of the valley, and this is where people climb up very arduously to collect the honey. Eventually we got to the border and passed through. No photographs allowed, but we were all filmed as we passed through, and the valley widens out and the river is wider, and very soon we were into the less hilly part of Nepal. Kathmandu is not very far from the border with Tibet, and before long we were in the hustle bustle of the very busy city of Kathmandu. The traffic is absolutely chaotic in Kathmandu, and after Tibet it was quite a cultural shock. After getting our hotel in Kathmandu, we went out walking, and before long we were walking down these narrow streets with lots of traffic and people carrying all sorts of loads, and we carried on further, and of course then there was narrower streets and more traffic. Motorbikes are the really popular form of transport here, and they wind their way through these narrow streets with, it seems, no regard for the pedestrians. Reminiscent of the hippie days when we were last in Kathmandu. Freak Street still exists, but now it's not quite as freakish as it was when we were there previously. Now it's just a street where there's lots of tourist shops and lots of tourists and some leftover hippies wandering along as well. The mix of traffic is quite amazing, with cars, motorbikes, pedal cycles and rickshaws, and of course pedestrians all mixing together, and they all seem to get through. Maybe this is a better way to run a traffic system. Pedal rickshaws wait hopefully for custom, and motorbikes, scooters and cars all line up at the traffic lights waiting for the off. In the Tamil area of the city, there are an abundance of stores selling clothes, trinkets, all sorts of colourful items. It's just a very colourful street to walk along. Moira wanted to try taking photographs, so she went up with a camera, and these are some photographs she took as she was wandering around. As in so many third world countries, the electrical and telephone wires are a sight to behold. The Swayambhu is a Buddhist stupa atop a hillock in the northwest part of the city, and is amongst the oldest religious sites in Nepal. Although the site is considered Buddhist, it is revered by both Buddhists and Hindus. The stupa consists of a dome at the base. There's a cubic structure with the eyes of the Buddha looking in all four directions. Walk around the bottom of the temple, spinning prayer wheels containing prayers and mantras as they go. There's a thriving market around the bottom, selling all sorts of religious and non-religious articles to the tourists and the pilgrims. The Durbar Square in the center of the city is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and is surrounded by spectacular architecture. It's the place where the city's kings were once crowned and legitimized, and from where they ruled. Durbar means palace. In the middle of the hustle and bustle of Kathmandu, there's this marvelous haven of peace and quiet. It's called the Garden of Dreams, and we went there several times because it's so pleasant. There's all sorts of gardens, and there's a nice restaurant in there, so it's very pleasant in the hustle and bustle of the city.